Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. In the history of Short Funk Podcasts, in the history of my podcasts in general, I tend to recommend films or talk about films without actually getting the names of the films correct. In this case, I wanted to talk about a Michael Moore movie. I think it's called Where Will We Invade Next or Where to Invade Next. I'm not talking about it as a recommendation. I started watching it some time ago. I picked it up and continued watching it. I think Michael Moore has lost his edge. Well, arguable whether or not he had his edge. I mean, even Bowling for Columbine or Fahrenheit 9/11. These are films that start with sharp points and ultimately dull as Michael Moore tries to work his way through the various ideas and really, I mean, in particular Fahrenheit 9/11, resolve the notion that the American service people that are going overseas to kill people, they're without blame. Let's just let them go and kill people. Let's just deal with that. And, well, that's just the nature of Michael Moore movies, right? There's nothing that can actually be said in any sharp point, aside from associated with a small number of people who, thanks to the funding of Fahrenheit 9/11, tended to avoid the Democrats in a rather curious way. In any case, one of the footnotes in Where Do We Invade Next, or anyway, this new Michael Moore movie associated with invasion, is relating to the behavior of women versus the behavior of men. Like, men do a certain series of things, and women do a certain series of things, and men basically are, more driven, headstrong, would run off cliffs and this kind of stuff, just are foolish in general terms, whereas women are more thoughtful, child providers, this kind of stuff. Let's just move Hillary Clinton aside. Hillary Clinton doesn't really belong in this category. She's just a corporate shill, but let's talk about, broader context of women. And I've reflected heavily associated with some of my own interests and some of my own thoughts, and the fact that certain areas of my interests there are only men, and other areas there is a good blend of men and women, and I wonder if there's something in what Moore has to say. Now, my first reading of this is it's fundamentally sexist. I mean, the dividing of anything based on gender, creating these categories and putting certain things on the men's side and certain things on the women's side, you always have counterexamples. Hillary Clinton's is a good one here. But when I think more about this, I realize that perhaps a lot of the stuff that I do, perhaps a lot of my thoughts and ideas, while being very much governed in that whole single parent raised by a woman perspective, I still enjoy the aspects of kind of chaotic, I wouldn't necessarily call it masculinity, but just certain areas that I don't think women folk really are interested in. And it's actually quite curious because there are certainly things that my wife and other women that I've talked to have had a serious aversion to that I just wouldn't think twice about. The nature of risk and the nature of taking risk seems to be something that men, some men, not all men, but a good quantity of them, they're just not tuned into. And I certainly would take risk relatively frequently about things that I don't even consider in the long term. I've thought about this periodically, and none of the examples I can give I can really discuss publicly, funnily enough, which makes this a very interesting topic for a podcast. But in the context of this, I'm trying to, on some level, resolve myself whether I can try to embody more of what Moore is talking about. Like, whether this is a real thing, or whether this is just fundamentally Michael Moore making a Michael Moore movie point that probably should be discarded. I think there is something there, and I'm interested, actually, in reaching out to Short Funk listeners, both men and women, who may understand what I'm talking about here, particularly associated with the dangerous risk element and certain masculine behaviors around that. Because what I see on the roads in particular, what I see just living in the US is that this high risk element is so well there, so well defined, so well preserved, so well enacted, that I wonder if this analysis actually has something. And I want to be able to talk about this without talking about it in the context of gender. And at this time, I just don't have the words or the ideas available. So I want to put it out to the Short Funk listening audience. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.